And so this is chapter 11 called The Cloister in the World in the book, A Religion of, or A Religion of One's Own. And right away, he starts off on page 237. Today, most of us don't go off to a monastery, but we may seek a utopian life of our own. It makes sense then to look closely at the monastic life to see if we can adopt some of its ways to modern secular life. So we're starting off with this thought or this idea of bringing some of the monastic life into practice. And then on page 238, towards the top, there's a sentence that says, there's something secure about having a minutely determined daily schedule punctuated by the chanting of the psalms and songs, and eating in the silence, and going to bed early and rising with the sun. And to me, when I read that, I know for myself personally, that's the power of routine. And I know some people don't do well with routine, but me, I love my routine. I love, love, love my routine. And so for me, my routine specifically, and it's been this way for many, many years, is getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and spending the first hour or two doing something, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's reading, whether it's writing, whatever it may be. I spend that first hour to 2 hours, depending on the day. And I do it most days. There are days when I do miss. Tomorrow will be one of those days because I'm going to be getting up at 4 a.m. to get to the airport. But the power of the routine for me means everything. And that's the thing that I think has been one of the greatest blessings I've given myself, is to spend the first hour to 2 hours of my days in connection with spirit. And so to me, that's really powerful. He goes on to say that he recommends it as a model for anyone creating a religion of one's own. So again, it's this model, whatever you want to do with it. As he continues on, and he talks about vows, and he talks of different types of vows people can make. So a vow of obedience, chastity, poverty, each of them designed to make community life tight and intense. So I think it's interesting that he brings up this idea of the reason that they do this is really to make a tight community. And if you would have asked me before I read this book, I would have said, well, the reason for these vows is for going deeper within. And he actually says, no, it's about making the community life tight and intense, which I thought was kind of an interesting take on it. I never thought about that when it comes to these different vows that I've heard of. Let's see. And then he says, imagine using these monastic vows as a general model for crafting your own personal religion. So I don't know if vows speak to you in terms of your own spiritual journey. I've really never have done a quote unquote vow, like, like he's talking about, including like a vow of silence. There's all kinds of different vows, right? But anyways, oh, Laura, that's who else we're missing. Did she say she was not going to be here? I didn't
No,
even.
I didn't.
Okay. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, wait a minute, we're missing somebody else. Anyways,
Didn't she start
okay.
a job?
What's that?
Yeah, no.
Joan. Yeah, Joan definitely was not going to make it, but I just was thinking about Laura. All right. So sorry about that. Anyways, so then it talks about making your own monastery, and it just talks about these different rooms that were specifically created. The main rooms were the chapel, the refectory or dining room, the recreation room, the private bedroom, and the library. He goes on to talk about the importance of having space, and really what this has done is it's made me think like, well, I've got my space inside my small altar and my small office. When we were in our other home, we actually had a meditation room, which was really beautiful, and we would use that all the time. But then, you know, he starts also talking about something outside, and that is exciting to me. Now I'm starting to think on this land that we have, how beautiful to create something where we can go and sit outside and be in silence. He talks about this idea of Carl Jung, and he talks about what he created in terms of his own tower. On page 240, he says his spirit, his psyche and spirit giving him a sense of expansive time, putting him into touch with his ancestors and helping him live a primitive life in the modern world, offering him a means of contemplation and serving as a concrete reflection of his own psyche. The fact that his tower was on land belonging to a once powerful and famous monastery added the dimension that we're talking about. So again, for Jung, he created this thing, this tower, and that's where he would go do all of his work and write all of his books. So on page 241, in the second paragraph, so with a general quiet and meditation going on, our home has a monastic feel to it. So him and his wife, specifically, Thomas More and his wife are very, they're both very inward. They're both wanting to spend time in quiet and alone. And I think, you know, honestly, even when I think about myself and Leah, you know, we both require a lot of quiet time. We both do. And even though we're out and about and we're busy doing a lot of things, ultimately we really like to have a quiet space, and it's important to both of us. And you know, he starts mentioning some things in the paragraph where that starts off with a monk's home isn't a noisy place, and he goes, it fosters a quiet and contemplative atmosphere, a meditation room, contemplative colors, statues, paintings, indoor plants and trees and photos. And he just starts naming a water fountain. And then he starts talking about different things to include in this. On page 242, he then talks about a garden. And I think of all the beautiful gardens I've been in my life. And yeah, there's nothing to me more beautiful than walking into a garden with the different flowers and different things. I don't think I'm the guy that's going to spend a lot of time making, and especially the maintenance on a garden, but I sure do appreciate them. And then what comes to mind for me specifically is Unity in Lee Summit with the beautiful garden that they have. And he talks about the different types of gardens. There's an Islamic garden, there's a Zen garden, there's all kinds of different types of gardens that you can create, right?
Right.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about celibacy. I just figured at this point in time, but for some people that's extremely important. And so if that feels like it's really, really important to you, then he talks about that and what it meant for him. One of the things in that chapter I will read is on page 244, where he talks about the paragraph that starts off with, let's remember that we're talking about making a religion of one's own and shaping a spiritual life around our own needs and circumstances. Strict celibacy is a major tool men and women have used to construct a spiritual existence. And so we should consider it in our efforts to create a secular spirituality. We don't have to abstain from it literally, but we could bring the spirit of celibacy into our ordinary lives. So I think that was an interesting little take on that. I think it's interesting. He talks about a vow of hospitality and stability. And later down on page 245, he says, hospitality may seem less important than, say, celibacy, but the effect of this spiritual practice is to create an atmosphere of warmth and friendliness rare in our busy, self-absorbed world. And so I don't know about you, but I think there's some people who naturally have the ability to have you relax and feel welcome when you come into their home. And I think some people are really, really good at doing that. And I think some people are not. I think for me personally, like I'm in the middle. I think I do okay. We do okay. My wife is amazing at it. She is off the charts good at it. I mean, you will come in, you will be served, you will be fed, you'll have a really nice time with Leah's around. I promise you that. She's not going to take anything to chance. It's amazing. Even so, we had friends and family in, and it was over the weekend, and we're staying at an Airbnb down in St. Joseph, Michigan. And my brother was really the one that coordinated all this stuff. And so we're out in the boat in the middle of Lake Michigan, and she went to my brother and she said, "Hey, like, so what are the plans for dinner?" Well, I hadn't really, and within seconds, all she did was she goes, "Okay, I'll take care of it." And she's on the phone coordinating some pizzas being delivered to our boat, so we could all have dinner. And I just thought, I mean, that takes time. It takes effort. It takes thought. It takes the ability to coordinate that, right? And she was the one thinking about, well, we got to eat. If it was up to me or my brother, we would have picked up chips and pretzels, called it good. We'd have been like, yeah, you're fine. We'll eat later. But I think she takes it to a whole nother level. Incredibly grateful for that too, by the way. Just, I am so grateful for her in the way that she does that. Moving on in the chapter, he gets into just talking about Thomas Merton. Obviously, reading this book, you realize how much of a fan he is of Thomas Merton. I know that I'm actually got his Thomas Merton's autobiography. I've got that in my list of books to be reading, because it's actually coming to me from 2 or 3 different people, which is always interesting to me. When a name or a book shows up from 2 or 3 different sources, it's like, okay, I should probably read this book. So I've got Thomas Merton's autobiography is waiting for me. I just got to go grab it and dive into it. Just one little comment that he made about Merton, which I think is interesting, is on page 247. He said his books, especially his diaries and notebooks, show a complicated man who never felt finished developing his own religion. So here's a guy who had a well-rounded life and eventually winds up at a monastery and actually says, this is even too busy for me. I want to be left off to this, like, leave me alone. I want to spend time in complete seclusion, which is pretty much what he did. And then as a result of it, he was able to go deep and do a lot of his writings and was really pretty well known. And I just think it's interesting that somebody who studied somebody like that even says he still wasn't finished with his own religion. And I think about that for myself. And to me, there's like, while I've got peace, like, my relationship with God is amazing. My relationship with my soul continues to grow. And so I feel really at peace with it, but I'm just a naturally curious person that just, things interest me. My soul interests me. Spiritual dimensions interest me in all the different levels and ways and stuff like that. And so I kind of resonated with that when he said he didn't feel like he never felt finished developing his religion. And I'm like, yeah, good. I don't think we ever should be finished figuring out what our religion is. I think that's good and healthy. On page 248, he says, in the paragraph that starts off with, to put that much intellectual and moral energy in a strict monastery is to ask for trouble, because he's talking about Merton here. But then later on, he says, his unwillingness to surrender completely to a highly regulated life gave him vitality, and he has always found that attractive. In other words, while I love routine, the thing you have to be careful of is becoming too rigid. That's what he's talking about. When you become so rigid in your practice, that's when you have to be really, really, really careful. And he goes on to say, forever dealing with his passions, desires, feeling frustrated, and trying to stretch the rules made him very human. It teaches us that working our own religion is a strenuous job that won't necessarily win friends or commendations. You have to remain loyal to your inner calling, no matter how conventional or unconventional it may be. And I love that, because I really think that it's just a matter of you doing you, no matter what that looks like, and having the courage to stand alone, to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And in that, I would also say the flexibility of it and being able to kind of go with what the moment brings. And so, there's this dance for me between, I love the routine, I love the discipline, I love all of that stuff, but I don't want it to become so rigid, because sometimes that routine can become too rigid. And I have dealt with that, and it just becomes stale, it becomes stiff, and we're not trying to do that. Okay, so the next section, he talks about a dedicated life, and he talks about the vow of beauty. And I love that, because I love beauty and I love being in nature, and I love that. On page 248, he talks about taking vows. The possibilities are endless. I've considered vows of pleasure, parenthood, walking my talk, friendship, and gracefulness. Some of these are relatively easy for me to observe, but others are a challenge. They flow directly from a place deep inside of me, but I live them in my daily life in a very concrete world. Each of us could select vows proper to us and promise to oneself that help structure and maintain a spiritual way of life. I love that. I think that's really beautiful. In the section titled The Model of the Monk, in the first paragraph, the sentence says, this linking of spirit and world could be our idea as well, as we try to craft a religious practice that is an expression of who we are. And I think that is really the best of the best of the best. I hope if anybody's paying attention to me and my life and what I'm doing, they would realize it's my own journey, and I'm adding to it. And so therefore, I find great joy in the regular stuff, but then I also have these side things that I do, and I love to go, obviously I'm a runner and I run marathons, and I love to read, and I love history, and I love all kinds of stuff. So I have several interests, and I think the bottom line is my religion is because an expression of who I am. And I hope, if anything, I can share that loud and clear, and give people permission to have a religion of their own and feel good about it, right? Feel good about that. I love in the second paragraph, it says, peppering a day with spiritual practices help make the whole day both meaningful, secular, and thoroughly spiritual. And if it's one thing that I would say that I'm wanting to do better at, is I'm great in the morning and all my spiritual practices, but sometimes as the days go, I forget to connect back in. And that's something that I want to be adding to my life a little bit more, is just pausing. I think that's one of the beautiful things about the prayer, about the practice, the Islamic practice of praying 5 times a day. I mean, they are on their hands and knees 5 times a day. It's incredible. They will stop everything they're doing. I've been in downtown Toronto at 5 o'clock, and all of a sudden see people pull out their little prayer mat, no matter where they are, and down goes the mat, and they go in prayer. And I think that dedication is really, really beautiful. And so he goes on to say, scheduling your day is a simple way to follow the monk's style. You might set up a few activities like meditation before breakfast, listening to music before lunch, being quiet after 10 p.m., eating simply in the morning, and taking a quiet walk afterward. So he just sharing some ideas on what to include. He talks about the monk's way of dressing, like dressing can become a big thing, which I think is really, really fun to think about. Obviously, there's people who love dress and really get fancy and everything, and then people are more casual, right? Monks in spirit, in that section, the sentence, the second paragraph, the strong sense of community that monks try to achieve in their monasteries is meant to be a model for others, a spiritual hothouse for experimentation and living out our ideas. And when I read this part, I thought about what would be beautiful to create that unity, right? Creating the spiritual hothouse for experimentation and living our ideas, and encouraging people to do that, and yet coming together as a community and being able to share with each other what our journey looks like. the next section, or not the next section, but down further on page 251, he's talking about a particular artist, Rothko, Mark Rothko, creates a special atmosphere for reflection. And he's talking about specifically a place, it sounds like a church that he built that was in the middle of the city where people could go. And he says, you'll see every spiritual tradition imaginable is represented. It's based on art, a suitable space for reflection. It draws on all the traditions equally and positively. It's located in the midst of the city life. Beyond that, it's welcoming, friendly, and intelligent. And so as I think, and I sit at Unity the days that I spend at our center, the one thing that I know about that space, and it's got me thinking after reading this, is that people walk that land all the time. The neighbors are constantly walking that land. They walk it to walk their dogs. I see kids riding bikes on that land. I see people walking up the stairs as a form of a workout. So people are on that land, and I thought, wow, we should really be working to create something really, really good here and make it more inviting. And I'm sitting there thinking about maybe where the trees are, we could create a little space where people could go sit and just be in a really beautiful space just to enjoy a nice tree on a hot summer day, to be able to sit underneath it in the middle of a day, and maybe have a little fountain there or something. Just make it really beautiful where you can kind of go reflect. It also brings to mind Myrtle's Grove in Unity Village. If you've ever seen it, it's pretty beautiful. The only thing about it is it's right next to a parking lot, but the grove itself is beautiful. And I thoroughly loved it because you can go there and just kind of hang out, and you can feel Myrtle being at the grove, right? Okay, I'm gonna hit pause on the recording. Okay, so this is comments and thoughts about chapter 12, A Sacred Way of Life. And he starts off right away and he says, to foster your spiritual life, you need an effective method, especially suited towards you. The Buddhists call it upaya, skillful means. And he goes on to say in that paragraph, the practice of religion requires precise and thoughtful action. And on page 254, he says, so what is your upaya? What means do you use to be a real person, open to the world around you and to the mysteries of your birth, your death, and the events of your life? The direction it has gone. You may pray, meditate, go to the place of worship, and try to live a good life. As an adult, you have to ask yourself, are these methods effective? They may not work because they are not you, nor not you of this moment in time. It may be appropriate now to tweak your those methods, or look for different ones. So I mentioned this in one of my talks a few weeks ago. It's like, look, the things that you're doing, that you've done in the past, may not be working for you anymore. And in my opinion, I know that that's happening for me, so I'm assuming it's happening for other people. And when I say work, I just mean that maybe you used to have a really beautiful connection meditating in a certain way, and now maybe that's changing. Maybe instead of sitting, maybe you've got to go for a walk. Maybe you've got to whatever. It's this ebb and the flow of the spiritual practice, as I call it, and finding out what's working for you, and what that may be may have changed over time, right?
You want me to let him know?
And so it's a paying attention to that. He goes on to say in the paragraph, when he says, when I think of one of my lifelong models, again, he mentions Thomas More. He talks about prayer, spiritual reading, ritual, a life and law of culture, educating his children carefully, caring for animals, making a good home, and being a leader in his community. He was a passionate man with some significant faults and blindness, but more than most, he knew how to make a religion for himself. I love the fact that he's bringing up, this idea of his had significant faults. Really, what that means to me is he was just really human, right? And if it's one thing that I think a huge mistake within at least the Christian religion is I think they put Jesus on such a huge pedestal, and I think that's such a mistake. I really believe if Jesus were to come down here and talk to you, he would say, they put me on this pedestal and I was just a guy. I was just hanging out, trying to figure out my connection to God. And yeah, I figured out some pretty amazing things about that connection with God. But the truth is, I got out of bed every day. I brushed my teeth. I went to work. I did what I was meant to do. In other words, he lived his life, and he wasn't and when I say he wasn't perfect, there's a saying that's called being perfectly imperfect. And I just can so relate to that because I think most human beings are perfectly imperfect, including me. And I think that's a beautiful thing to acknowledge, because then it takes the pressure off, right? Then I don't have to worry about being perfect. And then I also don't have to worry about everybody else being perfect either. So in other words, it's okay if I see other people being human. In other words, having a reaction or saying something or doing something where it's just, oh, come on, you can do better than that. And that used to be something that would upset me. It doesn't anymore. It really, for the most part, I'm not saying there aren't extreme situations that don't get under my skin occasionally, but for the most part, I've gotten to the point to where it's like, yeah, I wish they would have done something a little bit differently, but they didn't. So what? Who cares? Right? And then that way you can really come from the space of forgiveness, compassion, empathy. And I think those are all things that if we're being human and being stupid, I think we would appreciate it. And that's one of the things that drives me nuts about this cancel culture stuff that's going on in society, is just like, look, of course we can look back at a time in history and say, yeah, that probably wasn't the best thing to do. But guess what? They're going to say the same thing about us. So in my opinion, I'd rather look back and just acknowledge, those people. I don't have to agree with everything they did, but they did the best they could, just like we're doing the best that we can, and offer some compassion and some grace, not, oh my God, let's sit here and talk endlessly about it. I remember where that really came in was when I was my time on the board previous to my time now, when I was on the board for 6 years. And, I just remember that process teaching me that just totally honor and respect the people that were on the board, and respect the board presidents, and respect everything. Because the truth is, they really did the best that they could. And it would be easy for me to look back and go, well, they should have done this, they should have done that. And I landed at a spot where I would just go, no, I'm just going to respect them. I'm just going to respect what they did. Even if I don't understand some of the things and decisions were made, I'm really going to respect what they did, because it's not easy being in that position. And it's not easy to have to make those decisions, but you're the leader and you do the best that you can. And I would rather have people looking in the back and understanding it from that point of view than sit there and squawking about, well, they should have done this, they should have done this, they should have done that. And it's like, well, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. Why don't we just respect them for what they did and appreciate the efforts that they put forth? Anyways, enough on that. Let's see. He talks about, what's that, Trish?
Hooked on to that thought. When I was teaching school, you would have teachers in the teachers' lounge, and they would be chatting about students. And sometimes you'd hear comments like, what's wrong with the parents? What is the problem with those kids? And blah, 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 blah. And then the thought was shared, parents send you the best they've got. Their children, that's the best. They don't know how to do different or better. Yeah. So it's kind of connected to that thought. That's all.
Amen. Amen. At the bottom of page 254, he talks about this 5-legged table on which to build his religion: wisdom, compassion, skillful methods, wonder, and serenity. So I think it's interesting that he pulls those out for his 5-legged table. And so, then the thought comes in, okay, so what's your 5-legged table, right? Or do you have a 5-legged table? Maybe you've only got a 3-legged table. I don't know. I haven't sat there and thought about it, but I thought it was interesting that he brought that up, right? he goes on to talk about in the next section of do something in a religion of your own. The first thing is your own special vision, and then ways to embody your vision correctly. So I love that. I love this idea of sitting down and consciously creating what you want your religion to be like. I don't think anybody does that. I don't. And that's one of the things I love about this book. Is taking the time back to consciously say, well, what do I really want my religion to be? For me, what works, you know? And I think about, for me personally, the things that work are obviously the connection with God, the connection with my own soul, the connection with my own emotions, and being able to be in connection with that as much as I possibly can, right? And that could look like a lot of different things for me. For example, this moment right here, right now is one of those examples, right? Sharing this stuff with people so that they can have a multi-view look at what different aspects of the religion could be, right? So, you know, now we're talking about this book. Next fall, we're going to be talking about something else, right? And that's one of the reasons I love spirit groups, is because spirit groups gives people a chance to kind of play with their own spirituality, which to me is the reason I fell in love with Unity. The reason I fell in love with Unity is Unity said, go play. We don't care. Here's a spiritual smorgasbord. Go play, right? And I love that. I love that. There's no fear. It's like, hey, go play with it. Go see what works for you. Further in the chapter on page 257 towards the top, the paragraph, it starts, notice how strong, and he spends a lot of time talking about a trip him and his sister took to Thoreau's, to see Thoreau's the pond, or Walden's Pond, excuse me, written by Thoreau. And he goes on to say, notice how strong Thoreau's power and influence are. I believe they come from his habit of obeying a will deeper than his own. In other words, he followed his soul. He let himself be inspired and certainly didn't worry much about what other people thought. And as a result, his actions and words speak to our world over 150 years later. I would go so far as to say that the moral powers in Thoreau's words and actions comes from a city, a special gift that came to him as a result of his own obedience. I love that because the people that I really appreciate in life are just who and what they are. I have a tendency to be more reserved and sometimes more quiet. And at times that bothers me. I love the person that can just show up and let it rip and be who they are and could care less. I find them to be extremely refreshing. And I envy them that I wished I could show up like that more often. So, you know, I when I'm pushed, I'll absolutely say what's on my mind. But as a general rule of thumb, I have a tendency to be a little bit more quiet when it comes to certain things. The iconic Walden, in the second paragraph on page 257, he talks about, you want to be inspired intelligently, preparing yourself through reading and a spiritual practice to make the most of what you receive in those special moments of revelation. Yeah, absolutely. At the bottom of 258, he starts talking about penance. And I love this because, you know, penance is something that is extremely popular, especially in the Catholic religion. And I think it's wonderful that he goes, we don't need any more penance. He says, we need some joy and idea, encouragement, a philosophy worthy of us, a real community, neighbors to keep us from having to go it alone. We need our own religion, our own sources of inspiration, hope, and healing. And so I love the fact that he says, enough of the penance. You know, today we're doing penance every day. We're working hard to try to make money to keep our roof over our heads, food on the table, trying to maintain good relationships or marriage, trying to keep our children safe and happy and educated, trying to keep the world from blowing itself up. We don't need any more. I love that. I love it. Okay. He starts talking about basically natural rituals, and I don't know. Nothing in that section, honestly. He starts talking about Christmas a little bit and the different days that the religions celebrate. So I didn't pull anything out of there. In the next section, he talks about ethical acts. I love, and I hope that you had a chance to read it, but he tells the story about somebody who he knew named Mike, who started this nonprofit for kids, and that he saw this thing about these kids in Africa dying of starvation. Did everybody have a chance to read that thing that he had Mike write about his own? I just thought that was so powerful. I just thought it was amazing. And so I put a question mark in there and put next to it, should I read this or should I not? But if you've all read it, I don't need to. I just found that to be a beautiful story. I just thought it was an amazing story that started on page 261. 40 years ago, I saw a photograph of some children, and he goes on to explain his thing. And then his comments after that say that his statement contains several of the items I would include in the religion of one's own. He was aware of the traditions and draws from more than one. He has his own theology and translates it into a powerful individual ethical work. He also sees how his young son could develop a religion of his own through the experience of his father's good actions. So in the story, his son sees him doing this work and helping the children in Africa, and he wants to be involved with it. So that's the thing about it. In the next section, he talks about communities. What about community? Isn't that essential? And so he talks about the different things he did to experience community. He talks about going to a speech in Washington, D.C. With some fellow students from the University of Michigan, and basically just goes to talk about how that was really, really fun. I think about that. I've never been to something like that, but I think about going to concerts at times where there's like something amazing happening, or there's been some sporting events that I've been to, which is really, really fun when, you know, the home team's winning, so to speak. And there's a certain energy when you're sitting inside of a place with 40, 50, 100,000 people in some cases, and watching this thing unfold and everybody getting all excited. It's incredible. Like I've been in some amazing moments where the atmosphere is just magical. It just can be absolutely magical in those communities to experience something like that you know is special, you know is unique, you know. Anyways, I'm gonna hit pause for just a moment.